We've got a lot of classic films to get to this month, so I'm going to jump right into things with the Blu-ray debuts of the classic film noirs The Stranger and Kansas City Confidential from a small company called Film Chest. Now, here's the thing you need to know about these releases. These are films that are in the public domain, meaning anybody can put out versions of them that they want. MGM put out what I would consider the definitive versions of them on DVD a few years back. Now they've been released in high definition on Blu-ray, and the results are kind of mixed. Kansas City Confidential actually looks pretty darn good considering the age of the film, and despite some pretty ugly packaging on both movies actually. But Kansas City Confidential does benefit a little bit from being remastered in high definition. The Stranger, on the other hand, not so much. It really doesn't look very good. I'm not sure where the master for this print came from, but it's not doing the film any favors. You might be better off with the original DVD version, although of course with the Blu-ray you do get sort of the more interactive menus and stuff like that. Both of them are great classic films. Of course, Orson Welles and Edward G. Robinson bringing The Stranger to life, and Kansas City Confidential is also really good. Not as many of the big name stars, but you get John Payne and Preston Foster and Lee Van Cleef and Jack Elam, so they're both a lot of fun to watch, and these are fun to pick up if you don't already own the movies on DVD, but other than that, nothing too new except for some restoration featurettes, which in the case of The Stranger doesn't do a whole lot for the films. So next up, we have 3 releases from a new incentive from Fox and Allied Vaughn, which brings the MGM catalog classics is a word I use lightly, out on DVD. This is sort of like the Warner Archive. These are DVDs printed on demand for consumers. You can only order them online. They are not available in stores. And there's a whole bunch of different titles being released. The 3 that I got to review are Futureworld, The Spikes Gang, and The Seventh Dawn. Now, Futureworld, of course, is my favorite of the 3. It is a sequel to the classic Westworld with Yul Brynner. Now, this movie is not as good as Westworld. It does have Peter Fonda, has Blythe Danner, Yul Brynner does return, but it's of course a pale comparison to the first film. That being said, it is still a good time. It's still cheesy B-movie fun, and it is still a movie that I enjoy watching. The Spikes Gang is an underrated Western with Lee Marvin giving really one of his best performances. I'm not sure how this movie has kind of escaped public notice. Also, Ron Howard stars in the film, and it's just a good, solid Western film, action-adventure, really fun to watch, and a movie that I enjoyed discovering for the first time, so I'm glad I got a chance to check that out. Finally, we have The Seventh Dawn, which, aside from a nice performance from William Holden, is kind of a forgettable film. There's a love triangle, and there's communist terrorists in the country of Malaya, not Malaysia, Malaya, and while the back of the box calls it an action-packed, edge-of-your-seat adventure, it's not so much. It's okay at best. Fans of William Holden will probably enjoy it. Other than that, I wouldn't go out of your way for it. Much like the Warner Archive discs, these are movie-only DVDs with no extra features, but again, if these are movies that you like, they're not available anywhere else, so it's definitely worth digging in and getting them. Next up, we have the Ronald Reagan Centennial Collection, which is a 8-film collection that looks at some of Ronald Reagan's best films. You know, a lot of people forget he was an actor before he was the president, and we get some good films in here. It's kind of a mixed bag, as many of these kinds of archive box sets can be, but the standouts include Dark Victory with Bette Davis and Knute Rockne All-American, which is, of course, probably Reagan's most famous film. The other films are King's Row, which also stars Claude Rains and Ann Sheridan, Desperate Journey, which sees Errol Flynn co-starring along with Reagan, Irving Berlin's This Is the Army, and The Hasty Heart, as well as Storm Warning and The Winning Team. So again, it's not the best collection of movies in the world, but hey, if you are a Ronald Reagan fan, you like his acting, it's certainly a good set to have. I believe most of these DVDs are available separately, so it's kind of a nice kind of archival piece to have in your collection, but not necessarily a must-have unless you're a diehard Reagan fan. There are some extra features, kind of typical of the Warner style of releasing the classic stuff like this. You get commentaries, which is really the only new stuff, as well as vintage newsreels, musical shorts, cartoons, and all that archival stuff, which is great. Kind of makes it that night at the movies thing that Warner likes. Tying into that, and not really a classic film, but there is a new documentary out called Ronald Reagan: An American Journey, and it's produced and directed by Robert Klein, of course, the award-winning filmmaker, and it's a good, nice look at Reagan's life, his career, his tenure as president, and you know, at an hour and 40 minutes, I wouldn't say it's a long, because I mean the man lived a long life and he did a lot of things, but it could have been maybe a little snappier in the pacing. Still, if you're interested in politics and the presidency at all, this is certainly an in-depth and rather engaging look at Ronald Reagan. Next up, we have a couple of releases from Shout Factory. They are 11 Harrowhouse and Lucky Lady. 11 Harrowhouse is actually an interesting film. It's an early film from Charles Grodin, who co-wrote the film, and it's kind of this quirky heist film that has to do with a whole bunch of diamonds, a really securely guarded fortress, and a cockroach in a sort of strange way. And it's kind of a neat film. It's got a lot of humor to it. It is a heist film, which I do like that genre. And Grodin is a lot of fun in the film. He does have this very dry wit, and of course, if you like that, then I think you'll like this film. James Mason is always also in it, as is Candice Bergen, and it's just an interesting kind of fun heist movie. It's not a real gem, but it's certainly worth checking out if you like some of the players involved. And then we have Lucky Lady. A very strange movie. Gene Hackman, Liza Minnelli, Burt Reynolds. That's 2/3 of a great cast. I think you can figure out the weak spot there. And it's sort of it's a Stanley Donen film. And Stanley Donen, of course, directed Singing in the Rain, and it does take place in the Prohibition era, which I love, that era of films. But it's not really a great film. It's kind of got this love triangle, and it's entertaining enough, I guess, but it's really nothing particularly special. As far as bonus features go, you do get a couple of vintage featurettes about the movie and the original trailers, and a TV spot, and 11 Harrowhouse also includes a trailer, nothing more than that. Next up, we have Around the World in 80 Days. This is the television miniseries version that runs a little over 4 hours, and it stars Pierce Brosnan in the lead role, along with special guest stars such as Robert Wagner, Lee Remick, Jack Klugman, Roddy McDowall, Christopher Lee, Peter Ustinov, Eric Idle, and a whole bunch of other people. And as with most television miniseries, this is kind of a fun, lightweight, not great, not bad sort of adaptation of the classic Jules Verne novel. Pierce Brosnan is a lot of fun in the lead role. Of course, I always like watching him. He's very charming, and that's no different here. It drags on a little bit. It could have been a movie rather than a TV miniseries, but obviously this is back in the day when TV miniseries were made quite regularly and usually did very well. It's a great cast, a lot of friendly faces, a lot of familiar faces, and it's worth watching, but again, it's not anything you need to go out of your way for. If you like the story or you like Pierce Brosnan, those are the best reasons to check out this particular release, which does not include any special features, unfortunately. Next up, we have The Abbott and Costello Show, Who's on First? A very nice collection of 6 episodes of The Abbott and Costello Show, which of course includes the episode that has the classic routine, Who's on First? So 6 episodes: The Dentist's Office, The Birthday Party, The Charity Bazaar, Hungry, The Music Lovers, and The Actor's Home. And it's a lot of fun. I've always been a big Abbott and Costello fan. From the time I was a kid, my parents introduced them to me. I really enjoyed watching them. And you watch these shows from the 50s, and they're classic, and they're timeless, and they're funny, and you'll laugh out loud. Not every single joke hits every time, of course. Some of it, the humor can be a little bit dated, but man, those two guys really were comedic geniuses. And I'm sorry, but Who's on First still stands up for me as just brilliant comedy work. So it's really nice to have kind of a nice, good, solid, official version of it on DVD so that you can watch it and get a whole bunch of other Abbott and Costello stuff as well. Finally, we have a couple of double features from Shout Factory. A Roger Corman's Cult Classics double feature featuring Jackson County Jail and the original Caged Heat, and then an action-adventure double feature that includes Butch and Sundance, The Early Years, and Death Hunt. Now, Jackson County Jail and Caged Heat are your pretty typical exploitation films. Jackson County Jail features Yvette Mimieux, Tommy Lee Jones, and Robert Carradine, and then Caged Heat doesn't really feature anybody that you've ever heard of for the most part, and there's a reason for that. It is, however, written and directed by Jonathan Demme, so that is kind of a neat sort of treat for fans of the directors, and both of them are pretty typical low-budget Corman schlock that takes place in prisons and bad things happen to people, and there's definitely an air of exploitation. You do get some nice special features. You get an audio commentary with the director of Jackson County Jail, and interviews with Roger Corman and trailers, and you do get a commentary with Jonathan Demme and Tak Fujimoto, of all people, on Caged Heat, so that's a nice bonus. And then on the action-adventure double feature, Butch and Sundance The Early Years stars Tom Berenger and William Catt, and it's actually not as bad as you would expect for a movie that shouldn't have existed in the first place. And then Death Hunt is a surprisingly good action film starring Charles Bronson and Lee Marvin. Neither of them include any extra features except for theatrical trailers, but again, if you can find this cheap, it's actually worth checking out because both movies are better than you would expect them to be. And since I wouldn't think you'd expect much from either of them, I think that's actually saying quite a bit, so definitely worth taking a look at.